It started with a whisper, a single line buried in the corner of a tabloid story no one paid attention to. At first, it seemed absurd, even laughable. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, confessing to a secret affair with Prince Andrew years before she ever met Prince Harry? The world dismissed it instantly. How could two people from such different worlds, separated by decades in age and status, have ever crossed paths in that way? But as time went on, that whisper didn't fade. It grew louder, picked up by digital gossip boards, anonymous insiders, and royal correspondents who, for once, refused to deny it. And when Meghan herself finally broke her silence, everything changed. The moment was quiet, almost too quiet. There wasn't a red carpet, no flashing cameras, no Netflix special. It was said to have happened behind closed doors, a conversation recorded in confidence, a truth she claimed had weighed on her for years. And what she said was not just shocking, it was damning. She admitted that long before her royal wedding, long before her global fame, there had been a connection, a secret one, with Prince Andrew. A connection she called a mistake of youth and ambition, one she never expected to come to light. If true, this confession doesn't just open another royal scandal. It tears open a wound the monarchy has tried desperately to keep sealed. For years, the firm has been battling one controversy after another. From Andrew's ties to Epstein to Harry and Meghan's explosive interviews, to the internal fractures between Charles's reign and his children's reputations. But this was different. This wasn't a rumor planted by tabloids or a headline built on speculation. This came from Meghan's own lips. A confession that, if verified, could alter the entire narrative of her rise from Hollywood actress to duchess, and force the royal family to confront a secret they buried for over a decade. How could this have happened? How could a young actress from Los Angeles, then barely known outside a mid-tier legal drama, have become entangled with one of the most disgraced members of the British royal family? The answers lie buried in the years before the fairy tale wedding, before the public adoration and the global controversies. Back when Meghan Markle was not yet a household name, but a woman climbing quietly and strategically into the world of British high society. And according to multiple accounts, that climb led her to circles far more connected and far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. But before we get there, let's ask the question that's been haunting royal watchers and insiders alike. Why now? Why confess this after years of silence? Why risk everything? Her brand, her marriage, her reputation, to admit something that could ignite the fiercest media storm of her life? The answer, some believe, lies in her ongoing battle with the palace. A struggle that has moved far beyond family conflict and into something colder, more calculated. Others say guilt finally caught up with her, that the image she'd carefully built, the strong, misunderstood duchess, the wronged woman who stood up to the establishment, began to crack under the weight of her own secrets. Those close to Meghan describe her as a strategist, someone who knows exactly when to speak, what to reveal, and what to withhold. Her confession wasn't random. It was timed, precise. It came at a moment when the public's perception of her was at a crossroads. The sympathy that once surrounded her had begun to fade. The Netflix series was behind her. Her business ventures, uncertain. The royal connection severed. And now, in this vacuum of relevance, she chose to speak, not to defend herself, but to reveal something that would guarantee her place in the headlines once more. But this isn't just about scandal. It's about legacy. Because if Meghan's words are true, they don't only rewrite her own story, they entangle her permanently with the most controversial man in the royal family. A man whose mere mention evokes global outrage. A man whose name the palace has spent years trying to erase from public conversation. Prince Andrew, once favored by the late Queen, now exiled from royal duties and haunted by the shadow of a criminal association that nearly dismantled the monarchy itself. The idea that Meghan had any past involvement with him is more than sensational. It's explosive. To understand the magnitude of this, you have to picture the inner workings of the royal machine. The firm is built on control. Every photo, every word, every handshake meticulously managed to preserve the illusion of dignity and continuity. When something threatens that illusion, they bury it. They deny, distract, deflect. But sometimes, truth has a way of resurfacing no matter how deep it's buried. And Meghan's confession, real or perceived, has forced the royal institution into an impossible position. Deny it and risk the world believing there's something to hide. Admit it and watch the monarchy's last shreds of moral authority collapse under the weight of yet another scandal. Those who have followed Meghan's journey know this isn't the first time she's dropped a revelation that destabilized the royal narrative. From Oprah to the Netflix documentary to her numerous interviews, each appearance has carried the same pattern: confession, chaos, and control. But this time, the chaos feels different. It's darker, more personal, because this confession doesn't just target the monarchy. It implicates one of its most guarded, toxic secrets. There's another layer to this story, one that complicates the neat narrative of confession and consequence. Some royal insiders believe this revelation wasn't about truth at all, but strategy. They claim Meghan's confession was less about cleansing her conscience and more about reclaiming control of a narrative the palace had begun to weaponize against her. According to leaked accounts, Meghan's team had been made aware of an impending exposé, one that threatened to reveal private communications linking her to Andrew's circle years before her marriage. Facing that, she chose to get ahead of it, to own the story before it owned her. And it worked. Within hours, social media lit up. Hashtags trended worldwide. News anchors spoke with barely concealed disbelief. Did Meghan really just admit that? One host gasped on live television. The palace refused to comment. Prince Andrew's spokesperson issued a statement of complete denial. Prince Harry silent. For 3 days, silence. Then, as the noise grew, that silence became the loudest sound in Britain. The media circus that followed was unlike anything since the Oprah interview. But this time, it wasn't framed as a battle between Meghan and the monarchy. This time, it was Meghan versus history, and history has a long memory. Every royal scandal from Edward VIII's abdication to Diana's heartbreak was resurrected and reanalyzed under this new lens. Commentators called it the ultimate betrayal, not just of Harry, but of the late Queen's legacy. Others, more sympathetic, saw it as a cry for redemption. A woman finally admitting a mistake to unburden herself from years of lies. Yet beneath the headlines and the moral judgments lies a more disturbing truth, one that goes beyond romance or scandal. If Meghan's confession is even partially true, it suggests a network of secrets and manipulation that stretches far beyond personal relationships. It implies that long before her entry into the royal family, Meghan was navigating a world of influence where proximity to power came with both privilege and peril. And in that world, alliances were currency. Imagine the tension now within Buckingham Palace's walls. The air thick with suspicion. Every private conversation recorded in the minds of those who might one day sell them. Staff who once whispered in corridors now speak in coded silence. Senior royals meeting behind locked doors, debating the same question the public is asking. What does this mean? Could the monarchy survive another scandal? One this unprecedented, this incendiary? For King Charles, still fighting to stabilize his reign amid endless controversy, this revelation couldn't have come at a worse time. And yet, there's an undeniable fascination, even among those disgusted by the story. Because deep down, this isn't just about Meghan or Andrew. It's about the fragility of power, the masks people wear, and the way truth always seems to surface when it's least convenient. It's a story as old as the crown itself. Desire, secrecy, downfall. The confession, as alleged, wasn't made to the public directly. It wasn't shouted in front of cameras or written in a book. It came quietly, like a whisper from the past that refused to die. Those who claim to have heard it describe Meghan's tone as calm, deliberate, not defensive, not remorseful, but measured. It happened a long time ago, she reportedly said. It was wrong, but it was real. Those words alone, if confirmed, carry the weight of a bombshell that no royal PR team could ever contain. And now the questions pile up. What did Prince Harry know? When did he find out? Did this confession happen before or after their marriage? Did the palace know and choose to suppress it? Or is this, As some skeptics insist, a deliberate fabrication designed to manipulate sympathy. The truth may be buried beneath layers of spin, but the damage is already done. The royal image, already cracked, has just taken another fatal blow. Still, there's one haunting thread that runs through all of this. Every secret eventually comes at a price. Meghan may have thought she was freeing herself by telling the truth. But in doing so, she may have set off a chain reaction that could destroy more than reputations. It could dismantle what's left of the monarchy's illusion of moral authority. Because when the public begins to believe that every royal connection is tainted, every gesture strategic, every romance transactional, faith in the crown itself begins to crumble. And maybe, just maybe, that's what she intended all along. Because beneath every confession lies a motive. And in the world Meghan Markle inhabits, nothing, not even the truth, comes without calculation. The question now isn't whether the confession happened. It's what comes next. Because the moment those words escaped her lips, the royal house of Windsor was never going to be the same again. The rumors began long before anyone dared to repeat them out loud. They were small, almost invisible. Passing comments from palace aides, whispers overheard at charity galas, fragments of stories told in hushed tones at exclusive London clubs. But once Meghan's confession reached the public ear, all those fragments began to connect. Every coincidence that had once been dismissed as harmless suddenly felt like evidence. Every photo, every meeting, every unexplained connection took on new meaning. And the press, hungry for blood and redemption, dove headfirst into the mystery of how Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew had ever crossed paths in the first place. Long before she ever set foot in Buckingham Palace as a duchess, Meghan Markle had been fascinated by the world of royalty and influence. She had been strategic even then, attending the right events, meeting the right people, aligning herself with those who could open doors to power. London had become her new stage, and she played her role well. She knew how to charm, how to listen, how to make herself memorable. She wasn't famous enough to command a room, but she was captivating enough to stay in one. People noticed her, especially powerful men. And among those circles, one name stood out: Prince Andrew. At the time, Andrew was already a figure of fascination and controversy. Though his days as a frontline royal were fading, his connections remained vast. He was a man used to privilege, attention, and flattery, surrounded by courtiers and socialites who still treated him as untouchable. He was also lonely, estranged from the respect of the nation, but clinging to the remnants of his influence. The whispers suggest that somewhere in that intersection of power and ambition, Meghan appeared. Some say they met through a mutual contact in a London charity circle. Others claim it happened at a private dinner hosted by a minor aristocrat who adored Hollywood glamour. The details differ, but the tone is always the same. It wasn't love. It was convenience, curiosity, and calculation. For Meghan, those early London years were about positioning herself. She wanted a life that transcended acting, something bigger, something royal. Her friends spoke of how she studied British society like a textbook, learning etiquette, studying family lineages, understanding who truly held power behind the scenes. Prince Andrew represented proximity to that world. To be noticed by him was, at the time, to be noticed by the establishment. He was not a man to be loved. He was a gate to be opened. And Meghan, ambitious and perceptive, knew that gate could lead to bigger rooms. For Andrew, the appeal was different. Meghan was fresh, intelligent, and ambitious in ways he wasn't used to. She wasn't intimidated by titles or history. She asked questions most women wouldn't. She looked him in the eye and treated him not as a prince, but as a man who could offer her something tangible, a place among the elite. That intrigued him. For a man long accustomed to deference, her confidence was disarming. It reminded him of the power he used to command before scandal began to define his name. If there was indeed an affair, it didn't last long. It wasn't a romance of emotion but of opportunity. It was, as Meghan allegedly described it later, a moment of confusion. Still, that moment created a thread that neither of them could completely erase. When she later married Prince Harry, those who knew whispered that Meghan's past with Andrew had been carefully scrubbed from public record, sealed behind non-disclosure agreements and royal discretion. But secrets have a way of echoing, and as Meghan rose in fame, the shadow of that connection never fully disappeared. Insiders say that when Harry first began dating Meghan, certain senior members of the royal family raised quiet objections. Not because of her nationality, not because of her background, but because of her history with Andrew's social circle. There were meetings, questions, and nervous exchanges between palace departments. One aide reportedly said, "It wasn't about who she was. It was about who she might remind us of." Those warnings were ignored. The royal family needed a story of modern love, diversity, and progress. Meghan provided all three, and so whatever had been buried stayed buried until now. Once Meghan's confession became public, reporters began piecing together timelines. They noticed her visits to London around the same periods Andrew hosted several private charity functions. They pulled images from archives, noting how often she appeared at events connected to his acquaintances. Nothing definitive, just glimpses, hints, the kind of coincidences that make conspiracy irresistible. And soon, the question became less about whether they had met, and more about how deep their connection had gone. The palace refused to acknowledge the growing. As the weeks passed, the confession became more than a scandal. It became a cultural storm. It raised questions about power, gender, and the ethics of ambition. Could a woman who once sought proximity to power ever be truly free from its shadow? Was Meghan a victim of the institution she courted, or an architect of her own downfall? And for the royal family, it forced a reckoning with its own hypocrisy. They had welcomed Meghan as a symbol of modernity, only to now see her expose the rot that modernity could not disguise. But perhaps the most haunting question is the one no one dares to ask aloud. What if Meghan's confession wasn't just a revelation, but a warning? What if there are more secrets buried beneath the polished floors of the palace? What if this was only the first truth to slip through the cracks? Because history has shown one thing again and again. Once the silence breaks, the truth doesn't stop at one confession. It multiplies. It unravels everything built on it. And this, many believe, is only the beginning. If there's one thing the monarchy has always feared, it's not revolution, not politics, not even scandal. It's exposure. For centuries, the royal institution has thrived on the illusion of perfection. This power was never just in wealth or bloodline, but in mystery. The less the world knew, the more it revered. But Meghan Markle's confession did something unprecedented. It shattered that mystery. Suddenly, one of the most tightly guarded institutions on earth found itself dragged into the open, its secrets tossed into the public square for dissection. And at the heart of it all was a relationship that should never have existed. What makes this revelation even more shocking is how deliberately it seems to have been suppressed. When Meghan entered the royal family, her background was dissected from every angle: childhood, education, failed marriage, family drama. Everything was scrutinized. Yet somehow, the one story that connected her to Prince Andrew was never mentioned, never even hinted at. That kind of silence doesn't happen by accident. It happens when people with power make sure certain details never see daylight. And now, with Meghan's confession, that carefully orchestrated silence has exploded into chaos. In the weeks following the revelation, the palace entered what insiders later called containment mode. Every staff member was instructed to avoid any public comment. Security tightened around Andrew's residence. Lawyers issued quiet warnings to the press. The goal was simple: control the narrative before it consumed them. But this was not the 1980s, when palace statements could smother gossip. This was the digital age, and control was an illusion. The confession spread like wildfire. Every journalist, every podcaster, every social media influencer wanted a piece of the story. Hashtags trended daily. YouTube documentaries popped up overnight, promising the real truth behind the Meghan-Andrew connection. Meanwhile, inside Windsor, tension was suffocating. King Charles, already dealing with declining public approval and health rumors, was said to be furious. Not just at Meghan, but at the advisors who had failed to anticipate this. "We cleaned her record before the wedding," one aide reportedly said. "We thought there was nothing left. That single assumption would prove catastrophic." princess and, known for her bluntness, allegedly demanded that the monarchy cut ties completely. Prince William, ever the strategist, called for restraint, understanding that attacking Meghan would only make her appear persecuted again. The family was divided not by choice but by damage control. While the royal household scrambled, Meghan maintained a calculated calm. She didn't deny her confession, nor did she elaborate. Her silence was her weapon. The longer she refused to clarify, the more the world filled in the blanks. Every unanswered question became a headline. Every speculation became a theory. And in that chaos, Meghan remained, as always, at the center of attention, controlling the storm simply by standing in it. Then came the real blow. Investigative journalists began uncovering fragments of corroborating details, emails, photos, and travel records from Meghan's early London years that hinted at her proximity to Andrew's social circle. None of it proved a romantic relationship, but the patterns were damning. One particular report claimed Meghan had attended a private dinner at the Royal Lodge, Andrew's residence, under the guise of a charity introduction. The palace denied it immediately, but the damage was irreversible. Once the idea of intimacy is planted in the public imagination, denial sounds like confirmation. Prince Harry, already torn between loyalty to his wife and resentment toward his family, found himself cornered. Friends say he oscillated between anger and despair. On one hand, he couldn't believe Meghan would confess something so damaging without preparing him first. On the other, he saw the confession as another act of defiance, a statement that she could not be silenced, no matter how powerful the institution against her. Yet the strain began to show. The once united couple was now being pulled apart by forces neither could fully control. Every joint appearance, every public photograph was analyzed for tension. Body language experts dissected their movements like autopsies of a dying marriage. Meanwhile, public opinion fractured into two warring camps. Meghan's supporters framed her confession as a moment of raw honesty, a woman refusing to be defined by her past or shamed by powerful men. Her critics called it manipulation, a distraction from her dwindling influence. "She's not confessing," one columnist wrote. "She's performing." And in truth, both sides might have been right. Because for Meghan, truth and image have always been intertwined. She knows that in the world of public perception, confession can be a tool, one that both destroys and redeems. Behind the scenes, Buckingham Palace's press office faced an impossible choice. If they denied too aggressively, they risked fueling the story. If they stayed silent, they appeared guilty. A senior communications officer reportedly proposed releasing a brief statement that Meghan's recollection may differ, echoing the line used after the Oprah interview. But this time, that tactic would backfire. This wasn't a dispute over feelings or perspective. It was an accusation of history, of conduct, of morality. There was no safe middle ground. And so the palace did the only thing it could. It tried to disappear. For nearly 2 weeks, no senior royal appeared in public. Scheduled engagements were quietly cancelled. News coverage shifted temporarily to other topics, foreign visits, charity announcements, but the distraction didn't last. The confession was too sensational, too human. People don't forget the idea of forbidden intimacy within royal walls. They replay it, exaggerate it, turn it into legend. And in that retelling, truth no longer matters. What matters is the story. And this story had everything the world craved: power, secrecy, betrayal. But as the world obsessed over Meghan and Andrew, few noticed the quieter moves happening behind the curtain. Palace insiders began leaking information of their own, not about Meghan, but about Andrew. They wanted to remind the public that he, too, was a liability. The subtext was clear. Meghan might have confessed, but Andrew was still the greater threat. The leaks painted a picture of a man spiraling in isolation, furious that his name was back in the headlines, terrified of what might come next. One report described him pacing the halls of Royal Lodge late at night, muttering that he'd been set up. Whether paranoia or truth, his fear was real. The monarchy had always relied on hierarchy to manage scandal. Junior members take the fall so the crown remains untouched. But this time, the scandal cut across generations. It implicated the very foundations of royal respectability. If Meghan, the modern duchess who represented change, had ties to Andrew, the disgraced symbol of corruption, then what did that say about the monarchy itself? It wasn't modern or traditional, it was rotten. Two opposite faces of the same decaying coin. Royal watchers began predicting the unthinkable. That King Charles might be forced to permanently exile both Meghan and Andrew from any royal association, essentially erasing them from the official family narrative. For Andrew, it was a continuation of his downfall. For Meghan, it was martyrdom, a chance to prove that the institution punishes truth-tellers. And for Harry, it was tragedy. The man who once dreamed of reforming the monarchy now found himself caught between its ghosts. Yet even as the chaos deepened, Meghan never lost control of her image. Every photograph, every rare appearance seemed deliberate. She wore muted colors, her expressions calm, almost saintly. The contrast between her composure and the palace's panic was striking. Some saw it as guilt disguised as grace. Others saw it as the brilliance of a woman who had mastered the art of public manipulation. Either way, the optics were hers to command. Then came the moment that reignited the fire, a leaked audio recording. The clip, though brief, captured Meghan's voice in a private conversation, apparently saying, "It wasn't what people think. It was complicated, and I was young." The context was unclear, the authenticity disputed, but it didn't matter. The internet declared it real within hours. The phrase "it was complicated" became a cultural meme, splashed across headlines, tweets, and talk shows. Whatever remained of doubt evaporated. The world believed her, and by believing, condemned her. Inside royal circles, the realization dawned that the old playbook no longer worked. Scandals could no longer be buried. They had to be survived. And survival required sacrifice. Behind closed doors, senior advisors discussed distancing the crown from Andrew once and for all. Revoking privileges, freezing assets, and perhaps even forcing relocation. For the first time, whispers of complete removal circulated among the upper echelons of the monarchy. It was a desperate move, but desperation was all they had left. As the story matured, the question shifted from, "Did it happen?" to, "What does it mean?" What does it mean for a woman who once claimed to have been a victim of the monarchy to now expose herself as part of its oldest pattern, using power and being used by it? What does it mean for a royal family that preaches dignity while drowning in contradiction? And most importantly, what does it mean for the public, who for generations has worshipped the crown as a symbol of moral order? The answer is both simple and devastating. It means the illusion is gone. The monarchy, stripped of its mystique, stands naked before the world. A family of flawed humans, consumed by the very system meant to elevate them. Meghan's confession didn't just expose a secret affair. It exposed the hypocrisy at the heart of royal power. And as the smoke settled over Buckingham Palace, one truth became impossible to ignore. No crown, no title, no legacy can withstand the truth forever. In the weeks that followed Meghan Markle's confession, the world didn't move on. It froze. Every media outlet, from the most respected news channels to the most sensational tabloids, devoted their front pages to one question. Why now? Why would Meghan, after years of careful image management, after building herself as a global advocate for empowerment and transparency, suddenly reopen a door that led straight into the darkest corridors of royal scandal? The answer, according to insiders, was both simple and complex. Meghan wasn't just speaking to the public. She was speaking to the monarchy. It wasn't an apology, it was a warning. A signal that if the institution wanted to keep its deepest secrets buried, they would have to reckon with her truth first. It was her way of reclaiming power in a world that had tried to take it from her over and over again. But her words didn't just shake Buckingham Palace. They detonated it. Suddenly, every old rumor was revived. Every royal aide from the past decade was hunted down for comment. Media networks replayed archival footage, searching for clues they might have missed. Was there ever a glance, a gesture, a moment between Meghan and Andrew that hinted at something more? Clips from early interviews were reanalyzed frame by frame, with body language experts speculating endlessly. Some pointed to an old charity event photograph where Andrew and Meghan were seen within the same crowd. Others found a fleeting video of a handshake at a royal reception before her engagement to Harry. Every pixel became evidence. Every silence became an admission. Inside the palace, the atmosphere turned toxic. Staffers described it as a cold panic. The royal household has endured scandal before. Infidelity, divorce, even criminal investigation. But this was different. This one threatened the very hierarchy that kept the monarchy standing. Because Meghan wasn't just any outsider. She was the woman who had already torn open the firm's walls once. And this time, she had targeted a man whose name was synonymous with disgrace. The fear was palpable. If Meghan had proof, letters, emails, photographs, what else could she reveal? The king's private secretary reportedly held a series of emergency meetings. The strategy, once again, was silence. But the walls were thinner than ever. Leaks poured out, not from enemies, but from within. Some aides whispered that Meghan's confession had forced the palace to confront its own blind spots. Others were less forgiving, calling it a nuclear act of self-destruction, meant to burn bridges so completely that reconciliation would never again be possible. Meanwhile, Meghan stayed quiet. No statements, no denials, no clarifications. Her restraint only deepened the mystery. Was she waiting for the palace to react? Was she protecting someone? Or was she, as her critics claimed, orchestrating a slow-motion public spectacle to regain control of the global conversation? Whatever her motive, she had achieved something extraordinary. She had made the monarchy afraid again. Then came the ripple effects. Royal reporters began revisiting previously dismissed leads, old testimonies from royal staff, forgotten guest lists from private events, photographs never published. They painted a pattern, not of romance, but of proximity. Meghan had indeed attended multiple gatherings connected to Andrew's network in the years before she met Harry. Most of them were legitimate charity events, but now, in the aftermath of her confession, legitimacy no longer mattered. The internet doesn't distinguish between coincidence and conspiracy. Hashtags like #MarkleFiles, #AndrewConnection, and #RoyalSecrets trended across platforms. Every few hours, a new insider account appeared online, claiming exclusive knowledge of what had really happened. Some said the affair lasted months. Others insisted it was nothing more than a flirtation. The noise drowned out reason. People didn't want facts, they wanted drama. And Meghan's silence was the perfect fuel for it. Prince Harry's inner circle described him as a man in freefall. Friends revealed that he was blindsided by the confession, having learned of it from the same breaking news alert as the rest of the world. He was furious, not just at the leak, but at the betrayal of timing. One source said he confronted Meghan directly, asking, "Why now? Why like this?" Her alleged reply was chilling in its calmness. "Because they were never going to let me tell my story my way." Those words encapsulated everything about their relationship: the defiance, the secrecy, the constant war between public narrative and private truth. Royal correspondents began speculating about the implications for Harry himself. Had he known all along? If not, what did that say about their marriage? The idea that Meghan could conceal such a detail from him made headlines across the globe. Overnight, the fairy tale image of the Sussexes as a united front cracked. For the first time since their exit from royal life, the world began to. Meanwhile, the royal press corps, long accused of being complicit in protecting the crown, found itself in an impossible position. Reporters who once attended palace briefings with quiet obedience now faced a moral choice: continue defending an institution unraveling in real time, or finally start telling the stories they'd been suppressing for years. Some chose loyalty, others chose legacy. One veteran journalist, speaking under condition of anonymity, said, "We all knew there were things buried deep, but we didn't touch them. Now that she's spoken, the dam has burst. Everything is fair game." And burst it did. Old scandals resurfaced, new allegations emerged, and the royal household's once iron grip on the media shattered completely. Former aides began selling stories, retired staff began writing memoirs, and royal biographers were racing to update their books. The system that had protected the monarchy for generations was cannibalizing itself. Every insider wanted to be the first to tell what they knew, or what they imagined they knew. Within the palace, chaos became routine. The king's private office operated under a new mandate: control exposure, manage leaks, silence staff. Legal letters were sent daily, not to journalists abroad but to former employees at home. But there was a growing realization among the courtiers. This wasn't just about Meghan anymore. Her confession had created a fracture that no amount of paperwork could seal. It wasn't the content of her revelation that terrified them. It was the precedent it set. If Meghan could speak, who else might? How many other stories were quietly buried under decades of loyalty oaths and royal fear? Prince William, often cast as the steady heir, found himself thrust into the role of the family's reluctant strategist. His team worked tirelessly to distance him from both Meghan's confession and Andrew's disgrace. Every public appearance became a performance in damage control, smiling for cameras while silently calculating which question could ignite another explosion. Insiders claimed he pushed for a new communications policy, one that quietly retired Andrew from all family functions indefinitely. To the public, it looked like decisive leadership. Inside the palace, it looked like survival. But it was Prince Harry's silence that drew the most attention. For weeks, he vanished from public life. Rumors spread of private arguments, slammed doors, sleepless nights in Montecito. Friends described a man broken between two worlds. His love for Meghan and the ghost of the family he could never truly escape. Some close to him claimed he began questioning everything: his marriage, his exile, even his own role in feeding the chaos. But the most painful question of all was one only he could ask. Had he ever really known Meghan at all? For Meghan, the reaction was both validation and punishment. Her confession had made her the most talked-about woman in the world, again. Public interest surged, interviews were requested, and production companies circled, eager to capitalize on the drama. But fame is a double-edged sword, and the same confession that gave her renewed power also unleashed a tidal wave of scrutiny. Every action was judged. Every silence was weaponized. She had become both the storyteller and the story, the confessor and the condemned. Still, if Meghan was shaken, she never showed it. She appeared in public with composure that bordered on defiance. Her posture was impeccable, her tone measured. "The truth," she said in one brief appearance, "has a way of liberating you, even when it hurts." The words were simple, but their echo was thunderous. They were quoted, analyzed, and debated across the world. To some, they sounded like a woman unburdening herself. To others, they sounded like a challenge, a declaration of war against the institution that had tried to silence her. Across the ocean, in Britain, the palace finally broke its silence. Sort of. A short statement was released. The royal family is deeply saddened by the claims made and remains focused on private resolution. It was classic palace wording, distant, careful, bloodless. But this time, it only fueled the fire. Commentators mocked the vagueness, calling it the most expensive non-apology in history. Late-night shows turned it into satire. And the British public, long weary of royal evasions, demanded answers. Behind closed doors, the king's advisors knew the institution had reached an inflection point. The monarchy could no longer rely on reverence to protect it. The internet had turned every citizen into a critic, every whisper into a headline. One misplaced phrase could topple decades of cultivated image. Meghan's confession wasn't just a scandal, it was a stress test. And the monarchy, for all its ceremony and wealth, was failing it. Meanwhile, Prince Andrew, once again the epicenter of disgrace, found himself living in near isolation. His friends stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. Even the few allies he had left within royal circles began to keep their distance. The man who had once bragged of being the Queen's favorite son was now little more than a living embarrassment. Those close to him said he'd become paranoid, convinced that Meghan's confession was part of a larger plot to erase him entirely from royal history. He spoke in riddles, muttering that someone put her up to this, that it wasn't her idea. Whether delusion or defense, no one could say. But even his paranoia revealed something darker. He knew the truth was powerful enough to destroy him. As the scandal dragged on, public sentiment evolved. What began as shock turned into fatigue, then into something resembling reflection. People started asking broader questions about accountability, privilege, and truth. Why is the monarchy immune to the same moral standards as everyone else? One commentator asked during a heated televised debate. If Meghan's confession has done anything, it's shown that even royalty can't hide behind tradition forever. That sentiment echoed far beyond Britain. Across the Commonwealth, conversations began about independence, about breaking the symbolic ties to a family that no longer seemed to embody unity or dignity. And yet, amid all the fallout, one question refused to die. What else did Meghan know? If she had kept this secret for years, what other truths might still be locked inside her silence? Every whisper of her past, every unverified rumor, suddenly felt possible. And for the palace, that uncertainty was more terrifying than any confirmed fact. Because the monarchy can survive scandal, but it cannot survive mystery. That's the irony of it all. The same system that built its power on secrecy is now being undone by it. The royal family, for all its history, has become a mirror for modern corruption. A dynasty struggling to survive in a world that no longer bows to bloodlines. Meghan's confession didn't just expose an affair. It exposed the fragility of an empire built on pretense. In the end, the question isn't whether the monarchy will survive this storm. It's whether it should. Because what began as one woman's confession has become something far larger. A reckoning. A reminder that no crown can protect its wearer from the truth forever. If the royal family thought the worst had passed, they were wrong. The confession had not been a storm that blew through and vanished. It was a wildfire, spreading through every corridor of power that once defined the monarchy's grip on public perception. Meghan's words, once whispered in secrecy, had escaped into a world that thrives on speculation and thrives even more on contradiction. Every new day brought a new headline, every silence a new theory. And in that noise, the one thing that remained clear was that the royal family could no longer control their story. In the days that followed, the palace's private halls became a maze of tension. The king's advisors began dividing themselves into factions. Some demanded decisive retaliation, to publicly discredit Meghan, to frame her confession as fabrication. Others urged restraint, knowing that any attack on her would reignite the old wounds of victimhood and racism that had already haunted the family's image. They were trapped between two poisons, confrontation or silence. Both carried destruction. By now, every royal staff member understood that they were living through a turning point. For decades, scandals had been handled with routine precision. Deny, delay, distract. But this time, none of those tools worked. The denial looked defensive, the delay seemed calculated, and distraction had become impossible in the digital age. Every word Meghan had said was dissected, magnified, spun into millions of narratives across social media. And worst of all, people were listening. When Meghan spoke, she had an audience larger than any royal had ever commanded. A global crowd conditioned to believe that the monarchy hides more than it reveals. She didn't need evidence to be believed. She only needed to sound truthful, and she did. Calm, steady, deliberate, her voice was the weapon the institution had no defense against. Prince Andrew, however, was spiraling. His team released a terse statement denying any impropriety, but it fooled no one. The public had already made up its mind. To them, Andrew was guilty of too much for too long. Meghan's confession was only confirmation, the final piece in a pattern of arrogance, entitlement, and deceit. Even those who doubted her specific claim couldn't dismiss its emotional truth. They had seen the photographs, the arrogance, the scandals. They believed it because it fit the story they already knew. Inside the royal lodge, Andrew reportedly became increasingly isolated. Staff described him as erratic, pacing for hours, snapping at anyone who mentioned Meghan's name. He was terrified not of the media, but of his own family. He knew that as long as he existed as a liability, his brother's reign would never find peace. There were whispers of relocation, talk of sending him abroad under the pretense of private health concerns. He refused, insisting that he would not be exiled again. But his refusal only confirmed the palace's resolve. Meanwhile, in Montecito, Meghan's silence became her greatest power. She didn't give interviews. She didn't release statements. She simply allowed the world to keep talking, and it did. Every journalist speculated about what her next move might be. Was she planning a tell-all memoir? A documentary sequel? A speech? Every possibility became a headline, and every headline kept her at the center of the conversation. Even without speaking, she was winning the war for relevance. But not everyone saw it that way. Behind the luxury walls of her California estate, tension with Prince Harry deepened. Insiders described heated arguments, late-night disappearances, and quiet separations within the same house. He couldn't understand why she had detonated this bomb without warning him. "You've made us targets again," he reportedly told her. She responded coldly. "They were never going to stop until I did." It wasn't anger, it was calculation. Panels of experts reconstructed Meghan's movements from a decade ago, turning every private dinner and public appearance into evidence. Old friends were interviewed, former co-stars dragged into the spectacle. If the palace had known about her connection to Andrew before the wedding and suppressed it, the damage would be irreversible. It would prove that the royal image of moral authority was a carefully maintained lie. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation's findings remained sealed. But leaks began to emerge from within. A single line from an unnamed source appeared in a major newspaper. There were omissions, 2 words that carried the weight of catastrophe. Omissions meant cover-up. Omissions meant guilt. By the time the palace tried to deny the report, it was too late. The public had made up its mind. There had been a cover-up, and Meghan's confession had simply forced it into daylight. The narrative had flipped entirely. Meghan was no longer the villain. She was the whistleblower. And that shift, subtle but irreversible, changed everything. In one confession, she had gone from accused to accuser, from outcast to oracle. The monarchy, meanwhile, had lost the one thing it could never afford to lose: control. And as Britain watched the institution stumble beneath the weight of its own silence, a single, chilling realization spread across the world. This was no longer a family feud. It was a reckoning. Because in the end, it wasn't just Meghan's truth that had come to light. It was the truth of what the monarchy had always been hiding. And once truth escapes, it never goes back into the shadows. The morning after the latest revelation broke, London felt different. It wasn't chaos in the streets or crowds at the palace gates. It was something quieter, heavier, like the air itself had thickened. The monarchy had always been the country's rhythm, a familiar background hum to daily life. But now that hum had turned into static. People spoke in half-sentences, glancing at television screens in pubs and shop windows, waiting for the next headline. Across the Atlantic, in Montecito, Meghan woke to the same storm. Her confession had been dissected 1,000 different ways, but now something new was happening. The world wasn't just asking what she had said. It was beginning to question why she had said it. Her team had gone into media lockdown, but leaks suggested a new strategy was being considered. Not denial, not defense, but redirection. The goal wasn't to undo what had been said. It was to redefine it. The confession would not be treated as scandal, but as liberation, the story of a woman reclaiming power from a system that thrived on her silence. Within Buckingham Palace, the damage control meetings were relentless. Sleep became a luxury. Advisors, public relations experts, and lawyers rotated through briefings that lasted until dawn. The king was briefed hourly, his expressions reportedly alternating between rage and resignation. He had faced rebellions before, but this was different. This wasn't politics or policy. This was rot, deep, spreading personal rot. Meghan's confession had made it impossible to pretend the royal family was unified, moral, or sacred. Prince William, the next in line, found himself in an impossible role. He was expected to appear calm, dutiful, forward-facing, but every camera now followed him as if waiting for a reaction. During a hospital visit one afternoon, A reporter shouted across the line, "Did Meghan tell the truth?" His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. That silence, captured in slow motion and replayed across every network, became the most watched moment of the day. The public read into it whatever they wanted: anger, shame, guilt. Every interpretation drew new battle lines. Meanwhile, Andrew remained hidden. Officially, he was resting. In reality, he was under quiet surveillance, his communications monitored, his staff cut down to almost nothing. Royal protection officers were reassigned. He was, in all but name, under house arrest. The palace had finally accepted what it had feared for years. Andrew was no longer a liability to be managed, he was a threat to be contained. There were even rumors, whispered among courtiers, that a deal was being considered. Voluntary. It was a masterclass in controlled provocation, enough to reignite the debate, but not enough to trap her in it.